Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me in Moscow. Well, not really Moscow, but kind of there. And thank you for allowing me to connect from a remote, from distance. So let's get started. And today we are going to talk about Cerberus, which is a data validation tool I've been working on for a few years. Um, a few words about me. I am a software developer. I've been doing software for many years now. I co-founded my company back in 1991, so it's been quite a wild ride and long ride. And yes, I do a lot of stuff, but what is more relevant for you is that I am also very active in the open source scene, both in Python and C# and other languages. So Cerberus is a lightweight and extensible data validation library for Python. You can go to the website python-cerberus.org and find all the documentation, and most of the code samples we will see today, you can find them on the website, so you can kind of follow along as I keep going. It is, of course, open source. It has no dependencies. This was one of my first requirements when I started working on this project. I didn't want any dependency, and also I wanted something very lightweight, which would run on every version of Python. So we've been doing that since the start, since the injection. You can find Cerberus on GitHub, of course. So why the name Cerberus? Cerberus, I found this very nice quote from the Davis Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce. So Cerberus is defined as the watchdog of Hades, whose duty is to guard the entrance. Everybody sooner or later had to go there, and nobody wanted to carry off the entrance. And that's very similar to what happens with data validation. I mean, everybody has to do data validation at some point or another in their career. But yeah, it's that kind of work that nobody really wants to do because it is boring, it is prone to errors, and yet you still have to validate data as they are coming in. Especially so if you're writing, if you're working on, I don't know, a REST API or something like that, and you have data coming in from all kinds of sources, unknown clients, etc. You want to make sure that the data is sanitized before you store it on your backend. But before we dive into the Cerberus tool itself, I want to take a little diversion to tell you this fact that I find really interesting. So this is the eREST API framework on GitHub. As you can see, it has about 6,000 GitHub stars. Now, mind you, why I'm mentioning Eve? Because Cerberus was actually born as a stepchild of the main project, which was the REST API framework. I needed something to validate the data coming into the framework, and I started working on a data validation layer. And only a few months later, I decided to detach the data validation library from the framework itself and release it as an open source project on its own. Because I figure most people will want to do data validation regardless of the REST API framework. So back to the GitHub Stars story. So here has been doing very well. It is a very successful framework and it has a lot of stars. If we go and look at the Cerberus repository, it has a relatively low stars compared to Eve, just 2,000. So not that many stars, and that might tell you that Cerberus is not so successful compared to Eve itself. But if we go and look at the data and the stats, we have quite a different story. Here is these data are from, I think it's called PyPyStats website. It's been available for a while. It didn't happen to be available for many years, but now we have the hard data. we can see on the left the number of downloads that Eve is doing every single month. So it is quite a high number. I'm very happy about it, 10,000 downloads per month. But look at the downloads of Cerberus. It's 1 million and more every single month, and it's been consistent for many months right now. So like 100 better than Eve itself. So if there is one lesson from this talk, you should probably remember, regardless of not if you are interested in the library itself, is that GitHub stars aren't really a good metric if you want to judge a project or see if the project is good for you, if it is widely adopted or not. Yes, they are probably an interesting indicator, but just make sure you don't decide based on the number of stars. There are some super cool projects on GitHub with a relatively low number of stars, but still the adoption rate is probably much higher. You want to go at GitHub, there is a graph on GitHub, I don't remember what the name is, where you can see how many projects are dependent on the project itself. Of course, that's not the whole story, again, because you don't see the closed projects data there, but it is probably more relevant than just the GitHub stars. All right, let's go ahead and look at Cerberus itself. So how does it work? You import a validator from the Cerberus library, and then you define a schema as a dictionary. So here we see that we have a name field of type string, and then we instantiate our validator. Then we submit a document to the validator. We call the validate method, and it will just return a Boolean and tell you if the document is valid or it isn't. So just a Boolean is not that much useful, but this is the full example. Here you see the schema, we define the document, and then we are validating the document against the schema. You probably want to know more, for example, why the document is not valid. Here we have a more complex schema where we have a name field, but also an age field, which is of type integer, or I should say must be of type integer, and it has a minimum value of 10. So the document we are passing is not valid because age is lower than that, and we get a false when we validate, but we can investigate the errors property to know what the problem is with the document. As you can see, the errors are actually into a list, so there may be more than one error per each field. What about unknown fields? By default, unknown fields are rejected. So here the same schema, we have a name, and also we have a sex, but the schema only knows about name and age. So this document is rejected because sex is an unknown field. This is the default behavior, but you can set allow unknown to true. At that point, unknown fields will be allowed, as you can see in this example. Furthermore, you can decide that you want to allow unknown fields, but you want to be more strict, maybe, and impose, for example, a type on the unknown fields. So here in this example, we are saying that we do allow unknowns, but they have to be of type string. So the first document doesn't pass validation, while the second one, we don't have a second one actually here, but you see that there is an error, and the error is that the field must be a string type. You can also use allow unknown in nested mappings. This is an interesting schema. Here we have a document which has a subdocument. The field is called edict, and you see that in this subdocument we allow unknown fields. So we override the default behavior just for our subdocument. Here we have a full example. So we have this main document has a name, John, and our dictionary has an unknown field which is allowed. But if we try to use an unknown field in the main document, like here, this field here, but this will be rejected, as we see here in the errors. We also have a validated method which returns validated document if it is valid. This is very useful. If, for example, this is a very common use case for Cerberus. You have a list of documents, you want to validate them, but you want to be returned with a list of valid documents. So this is kind of a filter, you know. So here we are using a list comprehension, and we are submitting a list of documents, and we are selecting only the valid documents, and they are going to be returning in our list. So basically, give me all the valid documents out of this probably huge list of documents. And since validated returns the document only if it is valid, it is very easy and convenient to do. Now, many times we also want to transform documents as we validate them. Now, validation and normalization are two totally different beasts. You normally don't want to mix and match them, but somehow Cerberus allows you to normalize your document, and it is in fact a different step from validation. So here you see that we have this normalized method. So we have a schema where we have an amount field and a coerce rule. We will talk more about coerce in the following slides. So then we have a document with a field model and a field amount. Now look at this field. It has a string value here. It is a 1, yes, but it is a string, not a number. If we ask for a normalized document, because the rule is a coerce, which is a transformation rule, what we get back when we use the normalized method is a different type for that field. So amount is now an integer, has been transformed. Our normalized document has been transformed. Now, mind you, this is not validated, it is normalized. So if you validate the document, you still get a false because the document is not valid. But if you really want to transform a document, you can still use normalized and get your document normalized for you. Now, because we are in beautiful world of Python, we can do some tricks, like, for example, you don't want to define your schemas with a dictionary. Maybe you want somebody who's not very proficient with Python to be able to define the schema for you. You can do that, for example, with YAML. Here we are defining a YAML. In this case, it is a string, it might be a file, and you load your schema from YAML. You just have to import the YAML module, and then you go ahead and validate your documents from somebody else who defined the schema for you in YAML, because he is more proficient with YAML and not with Python itself. So let's give a quick look at validation rules that Cerberus has by default. Let's just say that Cerberus comes with a number of validation rules, predefined validation rules, and then we will see how we can expand on these to suit our custom needs. So type checking, we already saw this. We can define a type for a field, and of course Cerberus supports most default types which are supported by Python itself. What I find very interesting is that you can actually say that a field can be of different types. You just provide a list with a number of types. And so in this example, the quote field can be a string, but can also be a list. And this is very useful for a quote field, because as you can see here, the first document has just a single quote, but the second document has a number of quotes. provided as a list. Validation is valid for both. We can match against a regular expression. This is another very common use case. Here we are validating an email field. Super easy, you just set your regular expression and you're done. Frequently, you only want to allow for some valid values, and this is done with the allowed rule. So here we have a role field of type list, but we only want to allow agent, client, and supplier as value for this list. So the first document here validates because we are providing valid values, supported values, but the second document is not accepted, validated, because intern is not allowed. Sometimes you want a field to be allowed only if another field is present within the document. We call these dependencies. So here, field 2 is not required, but when it is present, we also want field 1 to be present. So the first document only has field 1 and it is valid. The second document only has field 2. It is not valid because field 2 has a dependency, so to speak, on field 1, so it is rejected. Field 1 is required. But sometimes you want to be more strict. For example, you not only want field 1 to be there, but you also want field 1 to have a certain value or one or more values. So what do? You just provide the dependencies rule with a list of valid values for the field 1. So again, the first document here has field 2 and it is valid because field 1 is there and the value for field 1 is valid. The second one is rejected because 3 is not allowed for field 1. And then we have the contrary. Sometimes you want a field to be present only if a second field is not there. So we can use the exclude rule. And here we see that the first field excludes the presence of a second field and vice versa. So here, first field is present, second field is present, false. We don't validate this document. While we validate the second and the third example here because, again, the two fields are exclusive. Now, take a look at the last example here. The document is empty, and it is still valid because the two fields exclude each other, but they are not required. Sometimes you want an exclusive OR. So we want first field, we want second field, they must be alone, but we don't want we want one of them to be always there. We don't want to accept an empty field. So the way you do that is super simple. You just set a required rule for both fields, as you can see here, and you still exclude the other field. So this is more a combination of two rules, exclude and required. And you can also, of course, exclude multiple fields. You just provide a list of fields, you want to exclude. What about subdocument? This is very common. You have a main document, an invoice, for example, and then you have a subdocument, which is a row. So you can define a schema for the subdocument, and that one will be validated as well. Here we have a field which is called edict, and then we have a subdocument which is an address, and we can validate that. We can also accept a list of subdocuments, which is the example I was mentioning before. So imagine, in this case, a list field, and all the fields must be of type integer. This is probably very common. And in this case, we still have a list, but the items within the list are subdocuments themselves, dictionaries. So we can say the rows for our document, they must be of type dictionary, and what the first field must be a string, the second field must be an integer, etc. So imagine an invoice with a rows array, and every document within the array needs to be validated as well. You can do that very easily. Then we have some, I call them magic methods. So for example, here we have any of, but you also have all of, none of, and one of. They are all work pretty much in the same way. So here we have a number, and this number has a number of rules that needs to be applied on it, but just one of them must be valid, and we can accept the document. So here we have any of a range of values, allowed values. So we have this number must be between 0 and 10, or between 100 and 110. So in the first case here, 5 is valid because it is within the first range, and 105 is still valid because it is within the second range. In this case, 55 is not allowed because it is outside of these two ranges, and we have applied an any of rule. Now, why call this magic method? Because actually you can shortcut most rules and apply this magic method to, for example, a type rule. So here we are saying that the foo fields can be any of these types, string or integer, which is roughly equivalent to the stuff you see here, which is way more verbose. I guess you will agree with me. And why this is powerful? Because, for example, you can scale up and use this magic method on schema themselves. Here we are defining two schemas for the department field, as you can see. And this is a list of schemas. So every document, every dictionary here is a schema, validation schema. In the first example, we have a required field and a regular expression, and the phone is nullable. In the second case, we still have the department field, which is required, but does not have any rejection, regular expression, sorry, and the phone is required. And here we are building a validator where one of the schemas must be valid. And the type, of course, of this field is still a dictionary. And we also allow unknown. So here we have another filter, kind of a filter, where we want to find all the invalid employees, or I should say, all the invalid phones for the employees. So we loop, we pass a list of employees, and for every employee, we get back the invalid documents. But because we are validating against different schemas, we can be very flexible in our validation. For example, here it is probably the same example, but this time we are applying the one-off schema. So either the first or the second of the schema, or the schemas must be valid. There are many more rules, so we don't have the time, and probably you are also not very interested in seeing all of them. These that you see in this list are very simple: required, nullable, forbidden, read-only, empty, etc., etc. Min and max. You can check on the length, etc. You can look at the documentation if you want to learn more about that. So let's move on and see and talk about the schema registries. Here you see the use of a schema registry. It is basically a registry where you can add schemas. Here we are defining a registry with a key user, and this is the schema for which we are going to store as a user. And then when we define a schema, we can define a field and just say apply the user, as you can see here, schema, and you can reuse it. Now, this is very nice when your validation rule set starts to grow, you have many rules, and defining the rules for your documents might become really cumbersome. So the trick here is to involve the schema registry, add rules to the registry, or I should say the schemas to the registry, and then recycle the schemas via the registry. This will really make your schema definition more readable and simple to manage. And we also have, of course, a rules registry. We call it rules set registry. In this example, we define a shortcut basically for the Boolean rule. Normally, you would go and define full of type Boolean, but you can just shortcut to Boolean, and every time you use Boolean, you are saying that you want a document, a field to be of type Boolean. And Booleans here is a plural, and this is for documents. For schemas, we want to allow for, again, here you can see that we are already using the Boolean shortcut within the rule set registry itself. So in the value schema, we accept Boolean value types. And talking about normalization, we have some tricks there as well. For example, we allow for field renaming. Here we have a document with a single field, but our validator has a rename rule for the full field. So here we are acting on the field itself, on the key, and not on the value. Every time we get a document within our normalized method with a full field, we rename that field to bar, as you see here. But many times you want to be more powerful. For example, here we have the allow unknown rule, and we provide a custom handler, a custom renamer, and we want to apply this transformation. We want to transform the key to an integer. So in this example, we have a string. We transform it to an integer, as you can see here. Of course, your rename handler can do and perform whatever operation you want on the name of the field. More so, you can have a pipeline. For example, here we have a function which returns only even digits, and our rename handler is defined as a pipeline. You see, we are using a list. When we do this, the transformation will be applied in sequence, starting from the left side of the list down to the last one. So we first apply string, and then we apply our lambda here. Again, let's look at this document. This document has a numeric key. We transform it to a string, and then we transform it to an even digit. Another very useful rule is to purge or purge unknown fields. So we might allow or not allow fields that we do not know. Sometimes we just want to get rid of them. This is very common. So this validator allows for a field string, for a full string, and also wants to get rid of all the unknown fields. So when we use the normalized on this one, you see the bar fields is unknown, and the return document does not have that field. So we can just use Cerberus to clean up documents and normalize them, standardize them. We can also set default values for some fields. For example, here the kind field is a string and has a default value. And when we pass a document without that field, it will get the default value. If it is there, but it has a non-value, still gets a default value. If it has a value, of course, it doesn't get a default value. And even more than that, we can have a default setter again. So here we are setting a lambda for our unknown field, for our B field. So our input document has no B field, and it will be set to our lambda. So here we are, look at this, we are getting the, when we use a lambda here, we get the document itself as input. So we take the key for the R fields, the value for the R fields, and add 1 to that, and that is going to be the value for the B fields. So transformation based on the other document, on the other values for the document, on the context of the document. And here we have value coercion. So we are transforming a field. We already saw this in one of the first examples. The flag type Boolean, and we want to actually force coercion to a Boolean. So if we have, like here, a true, which is actually a string, not a real Boolean, we can just transform it to a Boolean. Let's talk about extension now. We can build custom views. For example, here we are defining a rule which is going to validate a document and make sure that the values are odd. The way we do that is that we just subclass the base validator class in our own class, and then we define a new validation rule. Underscore validate, underscore name of the rule here is odd. We apply our own logic within the method, and then we can start instance our custom validator, and in this case amount with a value of 10 is not valid because amount must be an odd number. So our rule here is functioning. We can build custom data types. Here an object ID is validated, it becomes a valid type, and we can validate again our documents and make sure that the ID field in this example is actually a valid object ID. Now, mind you, this example here is a little obsolete right now. In the newest version of Cerberus, there is a much easier way to do this. We actually have a type register where you can register new types, very much like we did before with the schemas and the validation rules. So go and look at the document. You will find a better way to add valid types to your validation rules. And of course, the queen of all extensibilities, and this is the option to add your own validator to a field. This is probably needed if you need some more advanced validation. Here we are defining a function, and then we attach the function as a validator to the amount field. So here we are again still checking if it is an odd number, but we are using a custom method which we have attached to the field. And the same thing you can do with coercion. This is a complex example, an advanced example where we have our own validator, a subclass of the custom or the base validator. You see it as a constructor. It takes a multiplier. Here you see the usage of this one. Basically, we are normalizing, multiplying the values of the document by 2, as in this, the document has a full value of 2. Because we are multiplying by 2, the new values is 4. Just an example, of course. And here you see the schema where we have defined a new multiply rule. So every time a full field comes in, it will be transformed and multiplied by a factor of 2 because we use 2 in the constructor. This is just an example of how flexible your validator can be. And again, you can set default setters. Here we have a date, which is of course a date time value, but we also set a default setter. We want all our date field, when they are missing, to be of UTC default value. It is super simple to do. In this example here, we see how we can use Cerberus to validate objects and not just dictionary. This is very easy to do in Python, because we all know that classes in Python are actually using a dictionary to store the property values. So you just have to reach for the dunder dictionary within the class and validate that one. This is a very super simple example. So we are building an object validator with a schema, and then we pass a person instance to the validate object method, which we defined here in our subclass, and we can pass a person and know if the person is valid or not. So you don't only use Cerberus to validate dictionaries. You can extend your classes and your validator to validate so many things. We have an Expandable API. You can go to the documentation and look at error handlers, validation error extension, error list, etc. I'm not going to waste a lot of time here. Just know that you can go and find a rich documentation about the API that Cerberus itself is using. This is a testimonial. We had many in the past. This is one of the I probably like the best. They are using Cerberus Git Prime. Vincent here is the author. You might know Vincent because he is famous for the Git flow workflow. He is the original author of the Git flow post on his own website, and he's been serving as a CTO at Git Prime for quite a while. Just a few words for the development team. Right now, I am the author of the project, but and also the maintainer. But the main maintainer right now is Frank Funky Future, and I can't really pronounce his his surname. But yeah, Frank has been working really hard on the version 2 of Cerberus, which is about to be released, and it will carry many new features, and most of them are the result of Frank's work. So a big shout out for Frank, who has been kind of carrying the flag in the last month on Cerberus project. We also have more than 50 contributors to the project, and my invitation, if you like the project, is to join us and help me and Frank on the project with tickets, with new tickets and contributions, etc. We are very open to new contributors to join the development team. That's it. Thank you. If you have any question, I guess we probably have a QA session right now. And anyway, here you can find all my references if you want to get in touch with me. I'm very active on Twitter, but you can also send me an email or just go to the Cerberus website and you will find all the information you need. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicola. It was really nice to hear this extensive overview of Cerberus, and I never actually thought that it's capable of such many things. We will now transform to a Q&A session. We just need a minute to catch up the synchronization between the translation and the Zoom session. Okay. Итак, мы прослушали доклад, и сейчас переходим в часть Q&A. Напоминаю, что вам нужно в Zoom поднимать руку, чтобы технический модератор заметил вас и включил ваш вопрос. Не забывайте, что вам нужно останавливать трансляцию, когда вы будете говорить, потому что иначе вот это вот запаздывание будет создавать большие проблемы в прослушивании. Ну и да, опять же, если вы сомневаетесь в своем английском, то задавайте вопрос по-русски, мы его переведем и переведем ответ. Вот. Что там еще? Есть вроде вопрос, поэтому ждем, когда выведут. Я также напоминаю, что у нас есть восхитительные ребята, которые помогают нам сделать эту первую в мире конференцию, первую в России IT-конференцию, и мы вот очень благодарны нашему особенно генеральному онлайн-партнеру Тинькофф. Так, пока я не успел зачитать всех остальных партнеров. У нас подключился вопрос словно от Паши. Так, вперед.
Hello, thank you very much for your talk. I have a quick question about validation and exactly about best practices in validation, I think. So say I have some API which accepts some object. For example, it can be person with, like ID, name, and age. But sometimes when I'm first time creating this person, I don't have its ID. And when I want to update it, I have its ID and I pass this ID along with name or age which should be updated. What is the correct way to handle this situation of different validation for the same object?
I see. So if I get your question correctly, one option you have, at least with Cerberus, is to define a couple of schemas. We saw an example where I was defining two schemas and I was using, I think, the any-of rule. So basically, you can accept both a person without an ID and a person with an ID. So validation won't fail in either cases, if that's what you want. Or you can switch to an one-off option if you are in the situation where you don't want to accept the ID field, for example, because you are accepting a person for the first write. And in that case, you don't want the ID field to be there. You just use the one-off rules, or you just define one schema. And then when you are updating the person, you invoke the validator with the alternative schema. So you basically have a full control and all available options. You just have to decide which schema you want to validate against, or you can validate against both of them at the same time, if that suits your use case, of course.
Окей. У нас есть следующий вопрос, да?
Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Thanks a lot for your talk. This is like a really interesting library to look at.
Thanks.
So my question is, usually like when thinking about validation, I would probably like first things that come to my mind are, especially with REST APIs, are like Open API, the same like a Swagger, and also JSON Schema. So I think of like from what I saw, you are somewhat like compatible with those, or like is there any way to like convert a schema from one format to another, or you can just load the JSON schema and so on. So I would like to know a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, so thank you for this question. I get this very often. So often, in fact, that I want to show you our repository. I guess you are seeing my screen still, right?
Yep.
All right, so a while ago, I opened this ticket here.
Yeah, if you can just make it a little bit larger, the font.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just could you zoom in a little bit, please?
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Readable?
It's better, yes.
All right. So this dates back to 2016, and there is a story about JSON schema because I'm telling it here in this ticket. So you can go and check ticket 254. Basically, the point is that when I started working on EVE and on data validation, the JSON schema specification was already available, but there was no library for Python back then. Also, I wasn't really happy with the specification back then because it was very limited compared to what EVE and my REST API needed to do. So when I started working on Cerberus, the JSON schema library for Python didn't exist. So I opened this ticket in 2016 just to ask to the users, to the adopters of Cerberus, what do you find different between Cerberus and JSON Schema, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of one package compared to another. And over time, many people have been answering. Some have been doing some performance comparisons. Here, the second response you see here is from Funky Future, who is the main maintainer right now. For example, this guy here went into observation about OpenAPI, etc., because he's been using OpenAPI in his own projects. And so my advice here is that you go and give a read to this ticket, because you will find a lot of examples and pros and cons. And also, someone has been working on transforming, on making Cerberus validation compatible with OpenAPI. I think there is actually a project on GitHub, I'm not sure where, which does it precisely that. So you can, my advice is just go and look there and check out the ticket, and you find all the answers you need, and probably more than that.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we have one more question.
Yeah. Okay. Hello. Thank you for your talk.
Hello.
I wanted to ask you if you explored the idea of type annotations for validation, and if you heard of Pydantic project, which uses Python type annotations for schema validation. So like you can pass a dictionary to a model which you define as a class with type annotations. And what's the idea?
The
difference between your project and Pydantic?
I'm not really sure I got your question. So you're asking if I consider the option of using annotations or supporting annotations?
Yes. Okay, so the first question, did you explore the option of type annotations as a source of schema? And
no, I didn't. I actually, I don't think we ever had a request about this, so I never really thought about it, but it looks like an interesting idea. You might want to suggest it, or just open a ticket and we can give a look at it, explore the option with Frank probably, and see if it can fit in for version 2 of Cerberus, which is going to be released this year.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah,
well.
I guess I'll have a short follow-up on the last question, is that if you add type annotation, then you will have to abandon the support of Python 2, I guess. And
yeah,
is that on your roadmap in the future, or you will?
Absolutely. Okay. Actually, I suspect that with version 2, we will drop version 2 of Python support and just use Python 3. Python 2 has been kind of a hindrance lately. Frank has been wanting to drop the support for Python 2 in version 1 already, but we've been going strong just because so many people are using it on Python 2. But now that Python 2 is officially out of the question, you know, it's not supported anymore, we feel way more confident in dropping support for it, also because you can still use the old version of Cerberus, version 1.x, which is already a very powerful, and I mean, you can do whatever you want with that. If you kind of forced to use Python 2, you can still use Cerberus. But for version 2, the story is probably is going to be Python 3.
Okay, good to know that you follow the herd, so to say.
Yeah, we've just been waiting for the official dropout of Cerberus.
Yeah, I see.
or Python too.
When I used Cerberus, or when I was comparing different validation libraries like a Traforet, Marshmallow, the JSON Schema one, and Cerberus, I can't help but notice that the documentation of Cerberus is really great. So it looks like you have a lot of love for properly documenting this. Can you share if that's like a part of your vision, or is it just happened to be that way? Because I think that's the similar case with Python Eve, that it's very well documented and it's very beginner friendly and just really great that you care about this part. So is that something you developed over time, or you just like happened automatically?
This is a very good question. Thank you. Actually, I put a lot of effort in writing documentation, and also because English is not my, as you can tell, is not my native language. It really takes a lot of effort. But back at the time when I released Eve, I was always convinced that it could only be adopted if I documented it really well. There is a story about Eve. We don't have time now, but actually Eve was kind of an afterthought after I gave a talk at EuroPython back into, I think it was 2012. Back then I gave a talk about how to make REST APIs with Flask. And then people came to me after the talk and said, hey, because don't you release your framework to the open source? So the framework was ready, but there was no documentation for it. And then I went and spent maybe 1 month just writing documentation. It was full of errors, by the way, typos and grammar errors, all kind of horrors. But the community really helped me there because they got the idea and then helped me with correcting the errors and the typos and the grammars, etc. So with Cerberus, it's been kind of continuing on the tradition of trying to do my best with the documentation. I find that documentation is really key to any open source project. There is one guy in the Eve repository. He is not a developer, or probably not a very experienced developer, but a few years ago he submitted a pull request with so many corrections on the documentation and docstrings, typos, etc. I still value that contribution like it was some kind of new super cool core refactoring, because yes, really documentation is the the business card of your open source project. So it really has a place in my heart.
Great to hear. That's really nice. I think a lot of people who want to contribute to open source often overlook this, that they can just take a framework, just figure out how it works and just submit documentation, because that's usually not the first thing you do as a developer of some open source tool, and it's a really easy contribution that makes everyone's life easier. Okay, so I think we have one other question. Yep.
Hello, my name is Vladimir. Thank you for your talk. Let me continue the topic. I got a pretty simple question. How do you find the time to contribute to open source projects?
That's another good question. Actually, right now, I'm super happy that Frank has kind of taken over on maintaining Cerberus. I wish there was somebody like Frank for Eve itself, because yes, he has been really taking a lot of time in the last years. It's like 8 years now that I'm working on the framework. And now it is kind of stable, so it doesn't require me as much time as it used to do back at the time, but it is still, yes, very demanding. Now, when it was released and Cerberus with it, it was kind of key for our company, for my own company. So it was, just work. work done with a passion. Otherwise, I wouldn't release it as open source, of course, because just writing documentation was a lot of effort, and defining the API. I find that when you work with the idea that people all over the world might adopt your project and start using it, you are kind of forced to do the best you can, because people are going to look at your code and they kind of judge your work, and it's kind of the pressure is high, but it is beneficial. I find it really helped me improve my skills as a developer, as a professional. So the time I invest in open source projects is actually, it has a very good return on the investment. The developer I am today, 8 years after the Evo release, is, I think, much more skilled and experienced than what I would have been without my adventure in open source.
Okay.
And so my message is, you don't have to release an open source framework. You can just contribute to existing open source project. Just do that, because just the act of going and figure out how to submit a pull request to a project is going to do a lot of well things to your future self.
Great, thank you. It was really an inspiring talk, and even more inspiring questions sessions. I remind that we have a discussion zone, so there will be a few people, I guess, wanting to continue to talk. And yeah, so thanks for your talk and your time, and please stick around for the discussion.
Yeah, hello. Yeah, sorry, I'm back. So guys, do you have like any more questions to Nicola about anything you want to discuss? I'm actually interested. So we ended on a really positive note about how to be like how to do open source, basically, right? So my question is, have you ever tried, maybe considered organizing different kinds of, I don't know, hackathons for people, so to do like a code sprint where they can pick up some low-hanging fruits, or just fix some long-term problem that's been there for some time? So did you ever have something like that?
Yes, actually, I'm running kind of a local developer community here in my hometown. It's called Romagna, and when in this community, what we do is meetups. So we just yesterday evening we had a meetup about graph databases, for example. But sometimes we just meet to do some hackathons, and we have been doing hackathons on Cerberus, but also on different languages and stacks, all kinds of stuff. So I really like doing that. I'm also actually the organizer of the local Coder Dojo. And I don't know if you know about Coder Dojos. These are kind of coding clubs for kids. So we teach kids to do some basic programming. We use stuff like, what's the name of that project? Now I don't remember the name of the project, but it is basically something that came out of the MIT, and it is just a project which uses cartoons and stuff like that, and blocks like Legos to build flowcharts, and the kids use them to program animations on their screens, stuff like that.
Oh, something like Scratch, I think, right?
Yeah, Scratch. That's the name. Yeah. That's the name. That's one of the tools we've been using. And so I like to do hackathons with kids, actually. It's like 5 or 6 of us, which we are kind of mentors for them. We meet once a month, and we try to, inspire them to do use the computer for something else than playing, or using Twitter or Facebook or whatever they use these days, Instagram, etc. We try to inspire them and show them that they can be creative on a computer, by doing something, by building something with a computer, actually. And the message there is being a nerd is actually cool. You are not some introvert person or some stuff like that. You can be cool using a computer, and we try to show them how to do that. So yeah, I love doing hackathons with adults and with kids.
Do you have like any kinds of calendar where some guys can also register and participate? Because I recently read about several similar events happening like all over the world, basically, and now they're getting more and more active because everybody's sitting at home and they're like eager to find something to get busy. So, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, we do have a calendar. Now the local community is actually an Italian community, so you probably wouldn't have a lot of fun hacking with us. But yes, we do have a calendar. And actually, now that you mention the current situation here in Italy, as you can imagine, is we are really living a dire situation right now. We have a lot of issues with the COVID-19 virus. So people are closed in their homes. And yesterday evening, we had our first online meeting, actually, for our meetup. We usually just meet in some place like a library or something like that. But yesterday was our first online meeting. And what I found very interesting in that we had like maybe double the presence that we usually have when we meet in person. We have like 60 people, I think, yesterday evening online. And some of them were actually coming from all around the country. So from Turin, while we are on the east side of Italy, this guy was coming in from the western side of Italy. So being online is actually empowering somehow. I mean, I really prefer the personal meeting. For example, when we do our meetings, we don't do streaming. We don't record our session because we want people to actually get out of their homes and join us in person. Because you see, I find that in our industry, especially in our industry, we really need to get out of this stereotype that a programmer is somebody closed in his own room, a living room or a bedroom, just hacking at code night and day and not seeing the sunlight. I actually want to tell people, hey, you're cool. You can get out, have fun with other programmers. We can have parties. We can do smart things. We can go by the pool and stuff like that, like all the other people. And so I try to encourage people to meet in person. But with that being said, I'm learning that going online is actually has a lot of advantages. For example, you can gather way more people from not only from your hometown, but from everywhere in the world. So we are now considering doing in-person meetings and meetups, but also online meetings and meetups.
That's great. And I think, I don't know, just probably Italians are pretty good with English, right?
Yeah, well,
so judging by you.
No, actually, I'm not really good in English. I kind of learned, this is one of the other advantages of going open source. Before starting with Eve and the open source open source release of Eve, I wasn't really that good in, at least in speaking and listening English. I mean, I've been reading English since I was a kid, because when I was 14, I started using a Commodore 64 back then, and the Spectrum ZX, something like that. And yes, so I was buying, US magazines, because here in Italy, we didn't have anything about, I mean, there wasn't internet back then. We are talking the mid 80s of last century. So it's been quite a while. And back then, I could read English very well, but I couldn't speak it. And I couldn't understand anything if someone was speaking English. And the first time I went and presented to an international conference was actually back in 2012, so not that long ago. And I was mentioning it before during my talk, the QA session. I went there and did a 90-minute session on doing REST APIs with Flask. And people didn't realize, but that was my first time ever speaking English to a public. It was very scary. And if I go back and think about that thing, was probably the most dangerous thing I've done in my life. It's really stressful and important to me, very pivotal. And so I started improving my English only in the last maybe 10 years or so. But unfortunately, in Italy, not everyone can speak English super well. But yeah, the average people do their best. But it's not really a high level of English here in Italy on general.
Mm-hmm. But on your meetings, you usually speak Italian, I suppose.
Yeah, when we meet here in our hometown, we do speak Italian. Also because you see, we are talking with people like kids, and we do use Italian there. Yes.
That makes sense. Yeah, I was also like participating in the conference about like 2 days ago. It was like my first online conference, and it was like really a kind of new experience, especially with also with English. So
you speak English very well, so you wouldn't have any issue or problem in participating to any conference in the world, probably.
So, are there any other questions? I see there are some other guys here. Maybe you want to say something, or you can say it in Russian. I can translate.
There is something in the chat, probably.
Yeah, I see. Mike, you're unmuted. Go ahead. Oh, he muted back. Okay. Anton, I think you're also unmuted. Do you have anything to say?
Just listening. I connected 10 minutes ago. Sorry.
So you missed my talk.
Your questions about English, about you.
Yeah. So let me once again. I mean, after some time, if we don't have, if we run out of ideas for discussion, I guess we can switch to Discord. But let me ping people there once again. So maybe they want to talk about something. Yeah, I also saw like there is this format which is kind of like online school, but it's not really for kids. It's also like for adults and for people who already know the basics of programming, but they just want to drastically improve on that. Yeah. There is this format with I remember it's called like Recurse School. Or something. It's there's one in New York where you need to like go through a test, and then there is like an intensive week you should dedicate talking to people like one-on-one and learning new technologies that you like put in your survey that you wanted to learn, some new programming language or low-level stuff. So
very cool. Yeah, I think they are free actually. There is one school of this kind. I read about it in New York and also in Paris. I believe there is some kind of foundation behind them, and I think they might be free actually, and that's a very interesting project. But I think there is some millionaire behind that who is providing the funds for the school to work, and so that makes sense. I mean, you need money in order to do that. They have locations and computers and the spaces and room available, and so yeah, it's really nice. And also I saw that some very smart people are being coming out of those schools. So if you live in those towns or cities and you manage to attend those classes, you're probably a very lucky person.
In Russia, we have this format of how's it called, like hack spaces. So it's somewhat similar. It's just it's not really like a school, but it's a place where a lot of people, you can also like read lectures there or listen to lectures or some master classes, but also they have, so you can kind of rent a workplace there. And you can actually choose where to sit, and then you can join some team. Like there are always some guys there with like 3D printers. I guess they are doing some tinkering with electronic stuff, and it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, so it's a mixture between the co-working, and we do have some hacker spaces here in Italy where they use this kind of hardware devices like Arduino maybe, or 3D printers, stuff like that, and they experiment. That's interesting because you get to play with stuff you don't usually work with. Like, for example, me, myself, I'm a developer, software developer. I don't know anything about hardware. I never played with hardware. So for me, it would be super cool to team with somebody who's experienced with, I don't know, electronic circuits and stuff like that, and hack with some Arduinos, learn something new every day. I find that learning is key. Whatever you do,
I think you guys created Arduino, right? It was created in Italy.
Yeah, it was an Italian guy. Yeah. It's actually a friend of mine. Yeah, he's actually a friend of mine. Very smart guy.
It's one of the most portable like controllers in the world, I guess.
Yeah, very successful, hugely successful.
I actually have one right here. It's
cool.
Arduino Mega.
So you know something about Arduino, so not like me.
No, I just wanted to learn basically. So
okay.
And I believe last time when we actually had an in-person conference, there was a talk about MicroPython. So some guys, there is like a separate version of Python that can actually run on microcontrollers and even on Arduino. And it's also widely used by people who want, to do some school projects and like to teach kids how to deal with hardware. It's pretty nice. I mean, it's still sometimes a pain to read, the sheets of like which wires to connect where, but I mean, it's really, really amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know. Yeah, looks like everybody's like calmly sitting there. So I guess, yeah, let's not, it's really amazing talking to you. Thanks a lot for your talk and for this discussion. I guess let's switch to Discord for now. And so hope to see you in person someday when all this will be over.
Hopefully. So yeah, hopefully I will be maybe I will be in Moscow in September when you have your in-person conference. If you manage, I will be super happy to be there. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you in Moscow. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.